wondering if there was anything to that.
I don't think so. I got most of my notes on the antique words from the woman who, before she retired last year, was the head of our Italian department, and she takes camin, which is a shortening of camino, to be path. Like, you can say way, and that's legitimate, but I don't think there's any special significance there.
Okay.
In Spanish, camino means to walk.
And camino means road.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it sort of means a walking path.
Well,
but that's a common thing across languages. Like, look at the verb halach and then the noun halacha.
Yeah. Camino has, at various points in history, also meant things along with, like, highway or, like, royal route or something.
Yeah. So, questions?
So, where did Dante get his, like, ordering of sins? Like, is this, like... Because it seems entirely random.
It seems actually very random. Now, however, there's this sort of idea of, like, things you do out of... Alright, let me get my list to be sure I don't lie to you. I'm pretty sure that I know this, but basically the idea is that things that you do sort of out of desires or sudden emotions are less bad, like lust, gluttony. They're sort of... They sort of relate mostly to yourself. They're desires that everyone has, so they're not quite as bad. And obviously, limbo and neutrality would have to be less bad than the other things. And then you kind of have sort of things that harm other people, like the sort of the heretics and the violence and the stuff like that. And then, so the sort of people who are still acting in a kind of like, there's something like emotional and genuine about it, and still, so even though it's slightly worse because you're harming others, it still has there's a certain something about it that's less bad. You get to then sort of to the people who are sort of calculatedly and intellectually doing harm to other people or leading them astray, like people who lie or people who flatter, and those who are, whoring people out, people who are not, true to what they know not to do what they're doing, and they consciously choose to do it anyway. And of course, traitors, I mean, it's not hard to see why traitors would be at the very bottom of the heap. They're consciously doing something harm where they should to someone who should have expected good from them. So there is actually a certain logic to how he orders it.
Plus, I mean, he didn't like traitors in general.
Well, he also had some personal beef with that. He had some problems with traitors. They ruined a few things for him. You run into a lot of people Dante doesn't like in hell. And he has this neat trick where people in hell can not see the present on Earth, but they can see the future on Earth. So they sort of, a lot of them prophesied to him, because the way he runs it is very neat. He writes it when he's sort of older, but he writes it from the point of view as if he did this when he was young, before he was thrown out of Florence. And so he has people prophesy to him that he's going to be thrown out of Florence when they're in hell, sort of out of spite towards him. And other people who see him and don't know, whether they're their own children are alive on Earth or not. And he, like one man asks whether his son is alive, and when, Dante's like, oh, your son's fine. And he sort of says, well, why isn't my son here instead of you? My son's a better poet. And, it's stuff like that. It's kind of what he has to trade to everyone for their stories, is he can tell them what's going on now because they don't know.
Also, he puts people there who were either alive at the time his claim was written, or even are still alive and who outlived him.
And the only place he has any excuse for doing that is, like, when they're down in traitors. And he's like, well, they're possessed by demons. But everyone else, he's just like, they're dead. Really? Exactly. Like, he's ridiculous with that.
Have you ever heard of Dario? He is a butcher. He is possibly Europe's most famous butcher. He has a shop in this itty-bitty town, I think in Tuscany. And one of the things he's famous for is for throwing pork products at everyone and quoting Dante at length and, like, bursting into tears at the passion of Dante. And I think you would really like Dario. So I should go visit him when you're in Italy.
I feel like I would. They had this great guy, some Italian actor when I was in my Italian class who, like, gave a very dramatic reading in the middle of this, like, stone amphitheater of the Inferno in Italian. It was very glorious.
There's a memoir about this guy who went and interned with him, and apparently Dante broke up with his long-term girlfriend, and his response was to recite Dante mournfully everywhere.
This is appropriate.
So, obviously, I'm curious as to how much of this is supposed to be something like Dante actually thinks hell is like, and how much of it is just Dante making points with hell?
Interesting question. A lot of debate. I mean, most people agree that Dante doesn't really think he descended to hell. Like, he doesn't really think this happened. Most people agree he's not that crazy. From what I recall, the general idea is this is genuinely sort of how he thinks these things are arranged. The ordering of sins is sort of loosely based on the common understanding of where the sin should be. People had these ideas of the sort of gradations of sin. I'm a little foggier on exactly his ideas on Paradiso because I don't spend as much time with that because it's boring, but he also has a sort of idea with, like, that actually goes back to your talk with the epicycles and the spheres and, you know, and how everything was arranged spherically. It was a big deal in heaven. And so I think it's a mixture of the two. I think it's probably more political than theological, but I think he does think it looks something like that. He adapts a lot of classical aspects too, like he throws in Minos, the sort of Greek judge in the underworld. He throws him in as like a demon judge in hell also, because he really doesn't like to throw out antiquity. He has a meeting with all of the great poets of antiquity who were unbaptized in the early parts of hell, and he's just completely gaga over them, like absolutely like, Homer, Virgil, oh God, you're amazing, I love you. And so,
I'd sort of tangentially like to recommend